that out. I would love to work with you on that. And with that, we're with you 100%. We have no other speakers. I yield back the balance of my time, and we look forward to working with the chairman and the other members to get the right kind of outcome.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
And the ranking member is always a pleasure to work with. I now yield to the gentlelady from Missouri, Mrs. Hartzler, 1 minute.
Gentlelady from Missouri is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today as a lifelong farmer in support of House Resolution 72. My family has been involved in farming for generations. My granddad Zelmer raised corn and threshed wheat on a threshing crew, and my granddad Purdy was a cowboy raising Hereford cattle. Like today's farmers, they worked hard, investing their lives and resources to make a living for themselves and to feed the world. They would be shocked today by the amount of government interference in farming today and the overreach by government. The EPA is advancing numerous proposals that are harmful to agriculture. One rule wants to regulate dust on our farms. They call it air quality. Where I'm from, it's called living in the country. In case the bureaucrats in Washington haven't heard, driving on a gravel road and planting seeds in soil makes dust. We don't need Washington to regulate dust. We need common sense. EPA wants to do more. They are reviewing, again, the registration of atrazine, a common useful herbicide that's been used safely for over 50 years. This product encourages the protection of soil and less dust by using no-till agriculture. It's time to get government out of agriculture and preserve the farming heritage my parents and grandparents and so many others have passed on to future generations. Madam Speaker, I yield my time. Thank you.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, one of our subcommittee chairmen, Mr. Conaway, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Texas for 3 minutes. Recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm here today to address regulations primarily pending that fall under the jurisdiction of the subcommittee I chair. These regulations, many of which seem both illogical and prescriptive, possess the ability to adversely impact economic growth. The General Farm Commodities Risk Management Subcommittee has jurisdictional oversight over the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Corporation. Historically, the CFTC has been a model regulatory agency, but as implementation of the Dodd-Frank has begun to unfold, however, this reputation has begun to suffer. With each rule proposed, a newfound distrust is growing between participants in the CFTC. I believe this springs largely from the arbitrary, confusing way in which the Commission is undertaking its mandates. Currently, the Commission's consideration of costs and benefits is sorely lacking. By prioritizing speed over the deliberations, the Commission is not only producing poorly understood proposals, but they're also creating an irrational sequence of rulemaking. Because so many of the rules hinge on components of other rules, the order in which they are drafted and put before the public matters. For example, the Commission has failed to provide certainty regarding the definition that constitutes a swap dealer and who may be captured in that definition. The Commission has already attempted to categorize various commercial entities as swaps dealers, which makes no sense. Following the financial crisis our country faced, Frank-Dodd was enacted. Make no mistake, the intent of Congress and the Act was not to manage the individual risk on behalf of market participants, but rather to mitigate those broad systemic risks that threaten the entire financial system. Yet the Commission is currently headed down a path that extends well beyond the statutory requirements of Dodd-Frank and is attempting, at the request of no one in particular, to micromanage individual risk across industries and sectors. To return to the swap dealer example, in his confirmation hearing 2 years ago, the CFTC Chairman Gensler stated that there are roughly 15 to 20 swaps dealers around the globe that represent 99% of the markets in over-the-counter derivatives. Compare those comments to Chairman Gensler's statements yesterday in front of the Agriculture Committee that now believes there are 200 entities captured by this definition. This expansive definition will categorize far more firms as swaps dealers and moves far beyond the intent of Congress. It isn't difficult to see that the continued overreach of the Obama administration has become the rule, not the exception. Again, Madam Speaker, we and the varied agencies of this country, independent or not, owe it to the American public to ensure the assorted regulatory schemes carried out by the federal government work to promote economic growth, competitiveness, and innovation. The CFTC's current track seems to be sacrificing these principles for the sake of political expediency, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield to another outstanding subcommittee chairman on the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Rooney of Florida, 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the resolution on regulations and jobs. In particular, I'd like to discuss the USDA's grain inspection, packers, and Stockyard Administration, or GIPSA, proposed rule governing livestock and poultry marketing practices. This proposed rule should be carefully considered for its unintended consequences, particularly for those it's supposed to protect, livestock producers. In the proposed rule, GIPSA is attempting to overturn numerous judicial decisions by stating, quote, finding that the challenge act or practice adversely affects or is likely to adversely affect competition is not necessary in all cases, end quote. In other words, a plaintiff would no longer have to show actual harm when challenging a packer's activity. The rule would also ban packer-to-packer livestock sales and restrict dealers to representing a single packer. While intended to strengthen the cash market, these changes are likely to actually disrupt orderly market transactions. It will have far-reaching implications for livestock procurement, impacting producers, packers, processors, retailers, and consumers. It far exceeds congressional intent in the 2008 Farm Bill, lacks a credible economic analysis, and is the result of a flawed regulatory process. A subcommittee hearing last year demonstrated that concerns are widespread in the livestock community and concerns are bipartisan here in Congress. We must continue to examine this proposal and act accordingly. The 2008 Farm Bill process considered numerous proposals to address livestock marketing and procurement issues. Most of these ideas were rejected by Congress, and the USDA was directed to conduct rulemaking on a narrow range of technical issues. The proposed rule that emerged went far beyond the intent of Congress and was seen by many as an agency trying to win via rulemaking what it had failed to win in courts. The USDA determined that this was not a significant rule, even though observers assert that it will incur costs beyond the $100 million threshold for a significant rule. Therefore, no comprehensive economic analysis accompanied the proposed rule. At least 10 times in the proposed rule, GIPSA states some version of the phrase, quote, GIPSA believes that potential benefits are expected to exceed costs without offering any supporting evidence. The Secretary has since indicated that he will conduct a cost-benefit analysis. The taxpayers appropriated $13 million for this year's USDA's Office of Chief Economist. That office should have performed an analysis before the rule was proposed, so it could have been available during the comment period.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Mr. Chairman, I request 30 more seconds.
I would yield to the gentleman from Florida an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Concerns about this bill are broad and bipartisan. Members of both parties have raised questions about the scope, process, and intent of this rulemaking. The American people spoke in November to avoid these kind of Washington insider bureaucratic nightmares. Our work on this rule is far from complete, and we must continue to our efforts. Therefore, I rise in support of the resolution. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield to the subcommittee chairwoman from Ohio, Mrs. Schmidt, 3 minutes.
Gentlelady from Ohio is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this resolution and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I can't think of a single agency of the federal government that poses more threats to jobs in our economy than the Environmental Protection Agency. As chairman of the Nutrition and Horticulture Subcommittee, I'm especially alert to the threat the EPA poses to those charged with providing food and fiber for our nation. There are so many examples of actions undertaken by this President's EPA which defy sound science, good judgment, and will only result in putting America's farmers and ranchers out of business. For example, the EPA has proposed a zero-risk standard on pesticide spray drift. The EPA is proposing a standard that even it admits is unachievable. This proposed standard leaves our agricultural producers vulnerable to enormous compliance costs and untotaled number of potential lawsuits. Another example, the EPA has written a proposed exemption for milk from the Oil Spill Prevention, Control, and Countermeasures Program. This move puts the livelihoods of our dairy farmers in jeopardy because they could face enormous compliance costs. Under this regulation, milk would be treated as if it were motor oil, thereby necessitating dairy farmers across the country to comply with costly, burdensome rules designed to control storage of toxic substances. As far as I can tell, the agency's only stated reason for withdrawing this proposed exemption is that it was initiated under the Bush administration. Yet more than 2 years later, our dairy farmers are still in limbo. And another example of the EPA's disconnect with science at the expense of the economy is the agency's unprecedented multi-year, multi-million-dollar re-evaluation of a popular herbicide. Only 2 years earlier, the agency completed a 12-year review of 6,000 scientific studies and concluded that the product is safe. I suppose the logic for this re-evaluation is that with trillions of dollar deficits we face, we have the money to burn on pet causes of radical environmental groups. As if the agency didn't have enough on its plate, we see that they have issued a draft pesticide registration notice entitled False or Misleading Pesticide Production Brand Names. Note that the EPA is now attempting to regulate not the safety of the product, but the name of the product and even the name of the company that manufactures it. This notice threatens to undermine the very investment in our economy that this President spoke about 2 weeks ago in this very chamber. The President's EPA is threatening a potential loss of approximately $2.5 billion in brand equity for U.S. businesses. I'd like to...
Gentlelady's time's expired.
The Chair, from his very precious time, will yield the gentlelady 30 more seconds to conclude.
I could go on and on, Madam Speaker. The point of this is that the EPA is getting into areas where it doesn't belong, costing American farmers, American businesses, and good old Americans more money than they can afford. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield to a first-term subcommittee chairman from Pennsylvania, the gentleman, Mr. Thompson, 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support of HRS 72. This administration's EPA has been allowed to operate unchecked by proposing regulations and actions not based on sound science and data. For example, an issue receiving more attention in Pennsylvania is the proposed regulation of the Chesapeake Bay and surrounding watershed. These regulations have a devastating economic impact on my constituents. Unquestionably, the Bay is in need and truly worthy of our support. However, the EPA's shoot first and ask questions later approach will have detrimental economic effects on rural communities. The EPA, through a presidential executive order, has created a federal backstop for watershed implementation plans, commonly known as WIPs. This action has prevented the state's authority to implement their own strategies to clean up watersheds. Additionally, the EPA has proposed accelerated and unreasonable timelines for court-mandated total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs. The TMDL is a mandatory diet to restrict nutrient and sediment runoff. EPA has based the Chesapeake Bay TMDLs on its own bay modeling. This model has been called into question by many, including Limnatech, an independent and respected consulting firm on water issues. Using the EPA's own data, Limnatech compared it against data from the USDA, which showed inconsistent assumptions between agencies. The head of the USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service has recently gone as far as to say that the EPA's data on conservation practice is erroneous. Agriculture is not receiving the credit it deserves towards reducing nutrient and sediment runoff. Yet the EPA is forcing the Bay states to move forward on accelerated mandates using the agency's flawed Bay model and limited feedback from the public and stakeholders. Although the EPA unfortunately has not performed any kind of economic analysis of TMDL, continuing on this path will undoubtedly cause severe economic impact on producers and rural communities. For example, the Commonwealth of Virginia estimates it will cost $4,665 per taxpayer to meet the TMDL requirements. And Maryland estimates they're looking at $8,500 per taxpayer, or $10 billion over the next 10 years. This is simply a fundamental difference between the approach of the Agriculture Committee and the strategy of this administration. The goal is the same, the vitality and health of Chesapeake Bay, but the methods of achieving these goals could not be more different. The 2008 Farm Bill provided incentive-based aid for farmers and ranchers to provide management practices which would have a direct result of improving water quality. But the administration simply does not want to give the time for these programs to work. Instead, they have done what they have been doing since taking office, overregulating farmers and ranchers and punishing states for not meeting certain arbitrary benchmarks. Rural America cannot afford for the EPA to continue this arbitrary regulation and not recognize current conservation efforts. I strongly believe that we need to hit the pause button on the TMDLs and first perform a study on the progress already being made on Chesapeake through existing efforts already being employed. And I'm proud of the fact that the farmers are taking real action on the ground every day to improve water quality in the Chesapeake Bay region across the country. And I yield back. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I now yield to one of the senior members of the House Agriculture Committee and one of our subcommittee chairman, Congressman Johnson, 3 minutes from Illinois.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Speaker. The comprehensive and detailed analysis that we've already received from our distinguished chairman and my colleagues, I'm not sure what I can add, but I'll try. Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution provides that all legislative powers to be granted to a Congress of the United States. Remember when I was in 5th grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Arndt, kind of a seminal moment in my education, who taught us what was right at the time and what's been badly distorted since, and that is that we have 3 branches of government: a executive branch to apply the law, a judicial branch to interpret it, and a legislative branch to make the law. Unfortunately, that has all been turned on its head. We used to have the conventional wisdom that as we left here, the people's life, liberty, and property were safe. In fact, as my colleague and good friend Ron Paul said, when we leave here, we lose accountability and we turn the process over to unelected bureaucrats. The purpose of those constitutional provisions was to provide accountability through elections, the popular will, and yet this administration has consistently ignored separation of powers and legislative functions blatantly and defiantly through unelected, often even unratified, unaccountable, nameless, faceless bureaucrats who continually thwart the popular will and sound public policy. American agriculture, the worldwide leader in creativity and progress, the source of cheap food for a hungry world, is the prime target and victim. My colleagues have dealt very articulately with issues of price controls, GMO regulations, restrictive fees, and overburdensome regulations. In addition, specifically, Madam Speaker and members of the House, we have dealt and continue to deal with an EPA, a USDA, and a U.S. Department of Transportation who have dealt in areas of dust, backdoor cap-and-trade enactments, the Clean Air Act, hours of service, GMO coexistence, and otherwise. The key is this: none of these actions by themselves could ever pass the House or the Senate. None of these usurpations of authority are authorized by the Congress, and all of these serve to add dramatically to the cost of doing business and to reduce America's ability to feed our nation and help feed the world. Each one of us represents up to 800,000 people, and each one of us has to face the voters every 2 years. We have a sworn constitutional obligation to the American people, which is being twisted and subverted daily by perhaps well-meaning but nonetheless unresponsive people and agencies who have no practical scrutiny or control. And this bill, I contend, Madam Speaker, Mr. Chairman, members of the House, starts the process of restoration of legislative powers and upholding our fundamental constitutional values and obligation to represent people, rather than allowing people who are never elected, who are unaccountable, to run our public policy. With that, I yield, and I thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I now turn to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson, and yield him 1 minute.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the chairman for yielding. I rise today in support of the resolution and to share the sentiments of our hardworking dairy farmers in upstate New York. When I talk with farmers and other small business owners throughout the district, they constantly share with me the primary impediments to their growth: high taxes, out-of-balance regulations, spiraling health care costs, and rising energy costs. Today I'll highlight just one example of an onerous regulation, a bureaucratic overreach that the EPA is threatening to visit upon our dairy farmers. Because milk has animal fat that the EPA defines as a non-petroleum-based oil, the EPA is essentially treating our milk, our dairy product there, as a hazardous material. And if they do not get a waiver by November, our dairy farmers will have to invest in specialized containers and other equipment to be in compliance with new spill regulations. This will come directly out of their bottom line, and it makes no sense. I think we can all agree that spilled milk, we don't want to see spilled milk, but it's not a hazardous material. So, Madam Speaker, I support this resolution because I want to help our family farmers thrive and flourish. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holtgren.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the resolution and look forward to reviewing a number of regulations and orders from federal government agencies. One regulation I'd like to address today is the USDA's departure from a science-based regulatory system for biotech crops. 2 weeks ago, I spoke to a number of farm and agriculture groups from my district, and they indicated real concern that the current politicization, the regulatory process could set dangerous precedent for open, pollinated, and biotech crops in the future. The USDA has departed from the long-standing science-based coordinated framework between the USDA, EPA, and FDA that has been accepted throughout the world. By altering the process through a use of rules approach rather than science, this could have a significant negative impact on trade. In addition, I think it's important to make sure that all government agencies are allowed for a proper comment time for proposal of rules and regulations. As a government, we need a full understanding of how our actions will affect those governments by the rules. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the Congresswoman from Alabama, Ms. Roby.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the floor and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of House Resolution 72. Since becoming a member of Congress, there has been a reoccurring theme in almost all of my meetings with constituents: the overreaching and burdensome nature of regulatory authority in federal agencies. In my committee work just this week, I heard about the difficulties in the haphazard nature in which Dodd-Frank is being implemented and the negative impact of regulations in healthcare, education, and the National Labor Relations Board. It is obvious that the problem is not limited to one agency or industry, but a growing trend by the administration in their approach to implementing regulations. I'd like to take a moment to talk specifically about the Environmental Protection Agency's Boiler-Mac ruling. It would lead to the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, and it is estimated the cost the paper and pulp industry would be over $5.5 billion in capital and $1.2 billion in annualized costs. The Boiler-Mac ruling is only one in a long line of troubling rulemaking decisions by the EPA and other agencies. Farmers have continually been faced with the overreaching decisions such as rulings on pesticides, regulations of concentrated animal feeding operations, and non-point source pollution, to name a few. Alabama has a strong presence of agriculture, and I look forward to Congress exerting their oversight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I recognize next for 1 minute my neighbor from across the line in Kansas, the good gentleman from the big 1st District of Kansas, Mr. Hulskamp.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank Chairman Lucas for the time to speak on an issue that is near to my heart. Mr. Speaker, I came to Washington hoping to bring some common sense to a city sorely lacking it. We have too many regulations being written by too many bureaucrats who have no idea what the real world is like. And let me give you one real-world example. Regulators at the EPA think that dust poses a serious health and pollution threat and have proposed significant reductions in the amount of dust that can be in the air. It's dry and it's windy in western Kansas, where I come from, so when we drive on the dirt roads common to rural America, we churn up dust in the air. To keep this from happening, the EPA recommends spraying dirt on the dry roads twice a day. Obviously, they've never been to Kansas before. Kansans are hard-working people, and we don't have time to do this. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, we neither have the water either to spray on these roads. I welcome the opportunity this resolution provides for us to bring these regulators in and give them a picture of what life is like in the rural world outside of Washington. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of House Resolution 72. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we all know this is a challenging time for many families across America. Just like the rest of the country, folks in Middle and South Georgia are struggling because of this economy. You see, the government has taxed and spent the American home into a recession. In fact, Madam Speaker, the current administration in the last 2 years and piling on regulation after regulation has made it more difficult for small businesses and family farms to grow and create jobs. Agencies like the EPA and laws like the recently enacted Financial Regulatory Reform Bill stand to do nothing but to kill jobs. As a member of the Agriculture and Armed Services Committee, I look forward to working with my colleagues to tackle the burdensome regulations of these federal agencies. President Eisenhower famously said, "Farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles away from the cornfield." We need to take an eraser to these rules and regulations that the bureaucrats in Washington are placing on the American small business owner. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, might I inquire how much time remains for this?
Gentleman from Oklahoma has 3¼ minutes remaining.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself the time to 2 minutes. Would note to my colleagues on the floor, as you've seen today, members of the House Agriculture Committee are very concerned about the impact that these regulatory issues have on farmers, ranchers, processors, on the American consumer. And we are very committed in working in a bipartisan way with our colleagues on the entire Ag Committee to try and make sure that this onersome, burdensome, potentially economically destructive path that we seem to have gotten on in recent years is reversed. We will use the oversight hearing process. We will use every tool available to us, working with other committees. We will, in areas where perhaps we have some jurisdictional questions, at least dwell upon the impact and the effect of direct regulation. I promise you, over the course of this session of Congress, the next 2 years, it will be one of the highest focuses of the House Agriculture Committee. And perhaps, if we're successful, we will enlighten some unelected bureaucrats. Perhaps if we're successful, we will prevent the implementation of rules and regulations that will not only prevent jobs from being destroyed, but perhaps if they are unfortunately implemented, destroy jobs that exist in this country. That's our commitment on this committee. That's our effort, and we pledge very much to do that. And with that, Madam Speaker, I have no remaining speakers, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma gives back the balance of his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, this week is the 100th anniversary of the birth of Ronald Reagan. And I think it's altogether fitting that we quote Ronald Reagan at a time in which, 30 years from when he said it, we're dealing with the burdens of increasing regulation, creating a non-competitive situation for American workers. It was 30 years ago that America was in a malaise. It was 30 years ago that Americans found themselves without jobs and without hope. It was 30 years ago that they elected Ronald Reagan because a man of hope and conviction to tear down anything that impeded freedom and liberty, including the growth of government. So when Ronald Reagan said, Now let there be no misunderstanding. It is not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work with us, not over us, to stand by our side, not ride on our back. Government can and must provide opportunity, not smother it, foster productivity, not stifle it. When our committee put up AmericanJobCreators.com, we thought we might get a few hits. Today, the letters we have received from small and large businesses around the country, giving us with specificity regulations and regulatory excesses that are stifling their ability to create jobs, now is more pages than Obamacare. More pages than any bill I've ever seen come from here are stacking up with specific problems that America is dealing with here today, whether it's EPA, OSHA, or just regulators who won't give an honest answer to a fair question based on laws in which we required them to provide answers. America is falling behind and American jobs are suffering. So, Madam Speaker, our committee is dedicated to ensuring that regulatory reform occurs and occurs on our watch. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, as the ranking member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, I rise in support of H-Res 72. In fact, Madam Speaker, all of the ranking members of the committees that are debating H-Res 72 from our committee also join me in expressing their support for this resolution. I believe that we should take every opportunity to thoughtfully and comprehensively reform regulations to ensure that they protect the health and welfare of the American people while not unduly impeding job creation. Obviously, however, this resolution is unnecessary. Our committee already convened a hearing on this exact topic just yesterday. We also adopted an oversight plan that specifically addresses the topic. So spending 10 hours debating this non-controversial resolution does not seem to be the best use of members' time. Importantly, any meaningful discussion of regulatory reform must be based on a comprehensive examination that considers the costs and benefits of regulations, that develops conclusions based on solid data, and that seeks input from a wide variety of sources. President Obama launched such an examination when he issued an executive order last month requiring agencies to examine the costs and the benefits of regulations to the overall economy, to small businesses, and to American workers and families. Several of the witnesses who appeared before the committee yesterday testified that the President's initiative is an important first step. And by the way, these were the witnesses that were called by the majority. I look forward to receiving the results of the President's review. I hope that our committee will also undertake a balanced and thoughtful evaluation of regulations. And now, instead of wasting 2 days debating a resolution we all agree with, we should use our valuable floor time to consider legislation that will actually create jobs. With our national unemployment rate at 9%, and even higher among minority communities, and as I told my committee yesterday, there are areas in my district where the unemployment rate probably approaches anywhere from 20 to 35 to 40%. We should be focusing on concrete proposals to get our economy moving. That's what America wants. That's what America sent us here for, and that's what we should be about the business of doing. In the State of the Union message, the President proposed an initiative to create jobs and encourage economic growth through the modernization of our nation's infrastructure. On January 26th, the President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Thomas Donahue, and the President of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, issued a rare joint statement applauding this proposal. Here's what they said, and I quote, "Whether it's building roads, bridges, high-speed broadband, energy systems, and schools, these projects not only create jobs and demand for businesses, they are also an investment in the building the modern infrastructure our country needs to compete in a global economy." Similarly, in a study released by the National Transportation Policy Project in January 2011, Douglas Holtz-Eakin and Martin Wachs concluded after extensive analysis, quote, "Wise and well-targeted expenditures on transportation infrastructure can generate lasting productivity gains while also providing a more immediate stimulus to accelerate the nation's ongoing recovery from a devastating recession." These are exactly the kinds of bipartisan efforts our committee and the Congress should be supporting. For this reason, I wrote yesterday to the chairman of the committee, Congressman Issa, asking that we schedule a hearing on these issues, these job-creating issues. I asked that we invite the chairman, the AFL-CIO, and Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. I hope we will follow through on that idea. I think it would be a lot more productive than the debate we are having here today on this non-controversial issue. Importantly, as we consider such investments, we must also ensure that programs are in place to support small and minority-owned businesses that are so critical to the success of our economy. According to a report published in 2010 by the Joint Economic Committee, 3 out of every 4 workers in the United States are hired by a firm with fewer than 250 employees. These small businesses, which are the backbone of our economy, have struggled over the past 2 years with a lack of access to capital, and minority-owned businesses are particularly limited by their access to bonding. I would ask that the majority join us in trying to find ways to make sure that these businesses have an opportunity to be bonded. This is an issue that I started working on 30 years ago, and we see roadblock after roadblock with regard to bonding for small and minority businesses and women-owned businesses. We see it over and over and over again. That's what we need to be dealing with. Those are the kind. And another thing that we find is that if you were to go into my district and bring together small businesses of all kinds, they would tell you that the thing that's stopping them from hiring people is that things like access to capital. Many of them have had their lines of credit taken away. That's very significant. Anybody who has ran a small business knows that a line of credit is essential and is extremely important for those small businesses to survive. And so if we want to talk about trying to create jobs, which we should be, then I would hope that we would address that issue today. And so with regard to bonding, I am introducing legislation that would expand the Department of Transportation's ability to assist disadvantaged business enterprises working in the transportation industry in obtaining bid, payment, and performance bonds. This legislation would also create a program through which up to 5 states could receive federal funding to implement their own bonding assistance programs. If the Republican leadership is serious, and I mean if they are really serious about creating jobs and making investment in our nation's future, they should schedule time on the floor to consider legislation like this rather than squandering days on pointless debates guaranteed to create 0 jobs. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, as I introduce each of the members of my committee who sat through yesterday's hearing with witnesses on one side giving in specificity the problems, the regulations, what were the impediments to farming, to manufacturing, and to mining, it is amazing that the gentleman quoted them the gentleman from the other side of the aisle quoted them, but ignored his own witness who disputed any cost-benefit analysis being appropriate for looking at regulatory reform or even regulatory creation, preferring to simply say that all regulations should be judged on whether they do something, not what they cost. And with that, I recognize for 2 minutes the gentleman from New Hampshire.
Gentleman from New Hampshire is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank Mr. Chairman from California for yielding his time. Madam Speaker, I rise to add my voice to those calling for the end of overregulation that is strangling our small businesses here in my home state of New Hampshire and across our great nation. I believe that this is a central focus of the challenges that we face in this 112th Congress. As other members have suggested and stated, our nation is run by small business owners, by employers who are hardworking, put their time and energy and effort into creating something, building something, creating new jobs for new opportunities. In my home state of New Hampshire, about 75 to 80% of our economy is dependent upon small business. And what I heard in the testimony in committee and what I'd like to convey today is my great and grave concern for the fact that every small business owner has to pay $10,585 per employee for the regulatory burdens and requirements. That is a grand impediment to the creation of a small business opportunity. This is something that is centrally focused, that we have to address as a Congress, and I certainly urge the passage of this resolution. Whether you are Lars Incorporated in Rochester, New Hampshire, or T Enterprises in North Conway, New Hampshire, or J-Dubs in Manchester, New Hampshire, this impediment disallows the incentive that we believe is most important in our nation. I, as a member representing New Hampshire, want to ensure that we create an environment where small business can grow, can succeed, and employ people in our great state and in our nation. There are two interesting things going on in New Hampshire, project labor agreements that are infringing on the ability of a $35 million project being supported and the OSHA demands over our small businesses. I hope and trust that we can pass this resolution. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I want to clear up something that the chairman of the committee just said that is not completely accurate. Yesterday in our committee hearing, we had Dr. Shapiro to testify, and the thing that he said is that when regulations are created, they are created in favor of protecting the health, welfare, and safety of American people. And basically what he was saying is that we want to make sure that while you look at the cost-benefit analysis, you got to understand that sometimes it's kind of hard to quantify the benefit.
Would the gentleman yield?
No, I will not yield. I'm trying to make a point. And the benefit of not seeing a baby strangled in a crib, the benefit of making sure that people have clean water, the benefit of making sure that when we eat food, that food is healthy and that it's not poison. The benefit of seeing that if we eat a piece of fish, that it's not filled with Listeria. Those are the kinds of things that he was talking about. And so he wasn't saying that we should not look at it, but basically he was saying is that you got to understand that when we came to this Congress and we put our hands up and we swore that we would protect Americans. And that's what this is all about. And I'll yield to the gentleman.
I was only quoting what the gentleman had said and reiterated that he still supported. Cost-benefit analysis is neither sound in theory nor useful in practice. We asked him. He said he still stands behind that. That's much broader than the gentleman said.
Reclaiming my time, as I said before, he was saying that regulations are put into effect to protect Americans. And I want to make it clear that we on this side of the aisle, we have absolutely no problem with making sure that we look at regulations if they are outdated, if they are overburdensome to the degree that we cannot, there's no balance there, if they don't make sense, then we want to see those regulations go. But at the same time, what we're also saying is that it has to be a comprehensive examination. And I would think that the chairman of the committee would agree with me on that, that whatever we look at, because we want whatever comes out of this Congress to be credible and to be based on integrity, and we want the American people to buy into it, and hopefully this Congress to buy into it, that it would be a comprehensive view, that we look at the total picture, not just the cost, not just the benefit, but looking at it all. With that, Madam Chair, I yield to the gentleman from Missouri. I got so fired up here, Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 4 minutes.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank my friend from Maryland for yielding. And, Madam Speaker, my Republican colleagues advocate a free market unfettered by what they say are job-killing regulations. It seems like to them every regulation is job-killing. We hear a lot about that. What we don't hear from the Republican majority is anything about job growth. We don't hear any plans about job growth because the majority doesn't have any plans for job growth. In fact, the Republicans spent the last 2 years obstructing pro-job growth policy just to score political points. But they're wrong about regulation. For example, on the environment, we hear from Republicans that environmental regulations are killing jobs, but the facts prove just the opposite. Based on recent estimates, total employment created by capital investments in the power sector over the next 5 years is estimated at 1.46 million jobs. That's an average of 290,000 jobs a year in each of the next 5 years, and in a sector Republicans are telling us are full of job-killing regulations. While we don't hear anything from the Republican majority about job growth, we do hear a lot about free markets. To them, all we have to do is eliminate regulations and everything will be fine. Well, at least for some of their wealthy corporate contributors, the rest of us, we're on our own in the free market. Madam Speaker, I wonder if my Republican colleagues think a market free of regulations will ensure the safety and reliability of the nation's roads, railways, and airways. Our transportation system allows American businesses to transport their goods to retailers and consumers, and regulations make that system safe and reliable. Do they think a market free of regulations will enforce international agreements? Agreements help American businesses sell their goods and services abroad, and regulations protect and enforce those agreements. Do they think a market free of regulations will defend American patents, copyrights, and trademarks? Regulations protect American businesses against infringement, theft, and piracy. Does the Republican majority think a market free of regulations will protect the hundreds of millions of Americans who are their consumers and workers and ensure their continued safety and security? When they were the minority, Republicans worked hard to slow or even end the recovery from an economic crisis that they created. The crisis that the President and the Democratic Congress began to solve. The economic crisis that the new Republican majority, again for political reasons, seems bent on bringing back by eliminating the very regulations that create jobs. And I want to know if my Republican colleagues, who have not advanced one single plan to grow jobs here in this country, do they want to eliminate all regulations?
Would the gentleman yield?
No, I don't yield. Or do they just want to eliminate regulations that create jobs, that protect Americans, and that secure the economic and environmental future of this country, but they may also cut into the record profits of their wealthy contributor. Madam Speaker, instead of spending hours and days—
Time's expired.
30 seconds, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. Instead of spending hours or days on trying to score political points, the Republican majority should be joining Democrats and the President in focusing on growing jobs. Regulations, pro-growth, job-creating regulations are a necessary, successful way we can continue the democratic recovery from the Republican economic crisis, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state his inquiry.
Under the rules of the House, isn't it true that the limitation on taking down somebody's words based on casting aspersions or specific actions against an individual, for example, not caring about Americans or wanting children to die for lack of regulation, isn't it true that we can only do that if they cite a person, not the Republican Party as a whole?
The Chair will not be responding to that hypothetical question.
Madam Speaker,
Gentleman is recognized.
it would be in order for me to bring a motion to take down the words based on that accusation that was just made against my entire party, alleging that we want to roll back so that children are not protected and the like.
Madam Speaker.
The Chair will not be responding to such a hypothetical. Is the Chair making, or is the gentleman from California making such a demand?
Would it be in order for me to make such a demand?
Not be responding to such a hypothetical if the demand is made.
Madam Speaker,
The Chair will follow the process.
I think we're bigger than those accusations, regardless of it being likely to have been inappropriate by any standard. And with that, I recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Burkle, for 2 minutes.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from California for yielding his time. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 72. Last November, the American people sent a message to all levels of government. Get the government out of the way so that employers can create new jobs. Many in Washington seek a solution to our country's economic slowdown through a revision of the tax code and broad cuts in all levels of spending. I support these initiatives, but I do not believe they are enough. We must provide a climate for economic growth and job creation. Congress must relieve the American people from the hidden tax of excessive regulation and red tape. It is a tax that affects everyone, passed on every day in increased cost of products and services. To put things in perspective, according to a report issued last year by the Small Business Administration, the approximate economic cost of regulation is a staggering $1.75 trillion annually. Increased regulations stifle job creation and the expansion of businesses, both large and small. It cripples their competitiveness in a global market while smothering the innovative spirit that has made the United States of America great. Moreover, businesses are not the only ones who are harmed by these unnecessary regulations. Municipalities, school districts, not-for-profits, healthcare providers, and others serving the public pay a high cost to comply with the federal bureaucracy. Regardless of who I talk to in the great state of New York, I ask, what regulations burden you? Businesses of all sizes and from all industries talk about how they incur unnecessary overhead for compliance. School districts tell my office of stories receiving grants.
Time's
I'd
expired.
ask the lady have an additional 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. School districts told my office of receiving federal grants that will cost them 2 to 5 times the size of the grant to administer the grant. Not all regulations are unwarranted. Most Americans would agree on the need for regulatory protection, and to assume otherwise of this committee is irresponsible. Congress must address the cost to both business and the public before a new regulation is adopted. As member of Congress, we cannot cede over the responsibility of legislation to the unchecked regulatory regimes that end up levying this hidden tax. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, it gives me great honor to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, the whip, Mr. Steny Hoyer.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized. Hey, John. Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This resolution directs the House committees to review federal regulations for their effect on our economy. I agree with this resolution. I will vote for this resolution. In fact, that's an oversight, of course, that the committees should, in fact, be carrying out without this resolution. Democrats believe that it's important to vigorously review regulations to make sure they're keeping pace with the changing economy. And that's why President Obama has already issued an executive order that calls for such a review. Where regulations are duplicative, where they stifle innovation and entrepreneurship, where they hold job creation back without protecting consumers, they should be revised or ended. But let's also remember that federal regulations keep our drinking water and our air clean, protect our children from unsafe toys and food, put a check on abusive practices of insurance companies and credit card companies, and help control the kind of Wall Street gambling that wrecked our economy just a few years ago. As a matter of fact, even though regulations were on the books, we know that they were not enforced, which led to literally the loss of trillions of dollars by homeowners, individuals, and businesses. We want regulations that protect Americans and foster economic both of those goals in mind. There's a reason Democrats have worked so hard to pass the Make It in America agenda, an agenda with which I'm particularly identified. We need to, in that agenda, if we're going to create the environment that I heard one of the members on this floor talking about, that will lead to businesses being able to make things in America and do so profitably, review regulations, review tax policies, review other government policies to make sure that we are competitive in the global marketplace. But we also want to make sure that we have consumers protected, as I said, the environment protected, because there should not be a trade-off, but a complementary working of the two together. The new environment the federal government ought to work to create will promote growth, jobs, and success of the American people. Making it in America not only means manufacturing it, but it means succeeding in America, succeeding in global markets. I will, as I said, vote for this resolution. But the test will not be whether this resolution passes or fails. The test will be whether or not, in fact, we do the work that the American public expects us to do. The test will be whether our economy does succeed under the revisions we've made. I tell my friends on that side of the aisle, neither one of us have done perhaps the job we should have done. But also, one
additional minute.
Minute.
But we also ought to be humbled by the fact that during the 30 years that I have been in office, for 20 of those years, the Republicans have been in charge of the Executive Department of Government. Just recently, they were in charge, as a matter of fact, from 2001 to 2008, when we saw the deepest recession start and flourish and continue into this next administration since the Great Depression. So let none of us on this floor point the finger at one another. The American people want to see solutions, not angry rhetoric. The American people want to see this economy grow and create the jobs that they need. All of us ought to be committed to that objective. And we ought to project to the American people that we're prepared to come together and work together and legislate together to achieve that end. As I said, I will vote for this resolution, but the hard work is ahead of us. The 9.5 hours of debate that we have devoted to this bill,
30 seconds.
Frankly,
recognized for an additional 30
the adoption of this resolution could have been, as I'm sure most of us on this floor know, probably been done by unanimous consent, because what it calls for is our responsibility and is absolutely essential if we are going to create the kind of environment to grow this economy, create the kinds of jobs, and be competitive in international markets. And I thank my friend for yielding the time and urge the adoption of this resolution.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to associate myself with the Minority Whip's statements that both sides over the years have not done enough. The 30 years that have built up of regulatory excess is something that both sides need to take down. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford, for 4 minutes to make his comments.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from California for yielding. Madam